Midnight in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Rain hammered the town in sheets, drumming against old rooftops and pooling in the cracks of forgotten sidewalks. Mist rolled off the highway, swallowing the edges of the streetlights until they glowed like distant, dying stars. The only color in the night came from the bus stop, one battered bulb flickering overhead, casting long, warped shadows onto the slick pavement. Officer Mason Gallagher gripped the wheel of his cruiser tighter, exhaustion burning behind his eyes after another overtime shift. He was halfway home when a strange feeling seized him, heavy and urgent. He slowed the car, squinting through the rain. Something wasn't right at the bus stop up ahead. In the weak glow under the shelter, a shape huddled unmoving beside the bench. Most folks in Oak Ridge wouldn't be out tonight, not in this rain, not on this lonely stretch of road, ringed by thick woods and decaying warehouses. Mason parked, wipers still thrashing. He left the engine running, stepping into the rain. His boots splashed through shallow puddles as he approached the bus stop, flashlight in hand, every sense prickling with old cop instincts. A low, rough growl cut through the sound of the storm. Mason froze, beam landing on a pair of eyes staring straight back at him. Yellow, sharp, defiant. The dog was enormous, fur soaked and matted, chest rising and falling with shallow effort. Heavy wire twisted around his foreleg, stained with blood. The dog's jaw quivered but didn't snap. He didn't try to lunge or flee. He just held Mason's gaze, steady, proud, and exhausted beyond measure. Mason knelt slowly, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "Easy, buddy." He spoke low, voice roughened by sleep deprivation. And something deeper, something he didn't like naming. The dog shivered, every muscle drawn tight as a bowstring, but never looked away. There was history in those eyes, defiance, and beneath it all, a plea he recognized too well. Under the bench, Mason spotted a blood-stained flyer pinned to the bulletin board. He tore it free, heart pounding. The headline screamed, "Lost K9, Reward." The photo was faded, but the dog beside him was unmistakable. Same intelligent eyes, same proud tilt of the head. The flyer was no accident. Someone had left it here as a message or maybe a warning. Lightning cracked overhead. In that stutter of brightness, Mason realized this wasn't just a stray. Somebody had left this animal here, injured, chained, and waiting for what? A semi-truck's headlights swept the bus stop, slowing just enough to rake the shelter in blinding white. Mason's pulse spiked. Was someone watching, making sure their message was received? He pressed himself between the dog and the road, senses burning. One hand inching toward his sidearm. The truck rumbled off, leaving the night quieter but more dangerous. Mason crouched, inspecting the wire. The wound was bad, deep, ugly, bleeding fresh. He had to act fast. The dog's chest heaved, a strangled whimper slipping through gritted teeth. But he didn't flinch as Mason pulled out his pocket knife. "Hang in there, Atlas," Mason muttered, surprising himself. He didn't know how he knew the name. Maybe it was the look, the impossible pride. Maybe it was just a hunch, the kind that saved you or got you killed. Wire snapped, blood oozed. Mason shrugged out of his duty jacket, wrapping the shivering body as best he could. The dog's fur was cold and slick with rain, each breath a struggle. As he lifted the animal, heavy, limp, but still glaring at him with stubborn dignity, Mason felt the old ache of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He glanced again at the flyer, then at the woods beyond the bus stop, half expecting to see someone lurking. Nothing but rain and shadow. Still, unease threaded through every step as he carried the dog to the cruiser. The animal didn't resist, just rested his battered head against Mason's chest, eyes never closing, never looking away. Inside the car, the dog curled into the back seat, shivering violently. Every bump in the road drew a small, pained sound, but he refused to break eye contact through the rearview mirror. Mason gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles ached, fighting the panic rising in his throat. He'd seen too many things bleed out before help arrived. Too many lives lost because help came just a moment too late. He grabbed his phone, dialing the overnight vet, praying the line would pick up. "Mia, it's Gallagher. Listen, I've got a dog. Bad shape, gash on the leg. I'm coming in now, you got me?" The voice on the other end was brisk, gruff, and somehow calming. "Bring him. Door'll be open." Rain pelted the cruiser. Mason floored the gas, heart pounding like a fist inside his chest. In the mirror, the dog, Atlas, never looked away. Tonight, the shadows of Oak Ridge seemed to watch, waiting to see if Mason Gallagher would save what everyone else had left behind. And somewhere in that silent challenge, in the locked stare between man and dog, something old and broken began, just barely, to shift. Rain hammered the cruiser as Mason sped down the empty road, wipers barely keeping up, his heart pounding in double time. In the back seat, Atlas trembled so hard the entire car seemed to shudder with him. Every turn made the dog wince, and Mason kept glancing in the mirror, watching those golden eyes, watching the way pain flashed and faded, replaced by a silent endurance that was somehow more haunting than a scream. Every time their gazes met, Atlas didn't look away. He seemed to be measuring Mason, deciding if this man was just another shadow passing through the dark. The phone at Mason's hip buzzed. A text from Dr. Mia Caldwell, front lights on, side door unlocked. "Come straight in." Mason barely tapped a reply. Every second felt like something slipping away. As he pulled into the parking lot behind the Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic, he saw the porch light burning against the rain. He opened the back door. Atlas tried to stand but crumpled, his injured leg giving way. Mason knelt in the puddle, slipping his arms beneath the dog's chest and haunches. The German Shepherd was heavier than he looked, dead weight gone soft from exhaustion and pain. But as Mason lifted, he felt a thin tongue flick across his hand. The gesture was weak, almost automatic, but it nearly undid him. Not quite trust, not quite surrender, just a simple acknowledgement. "I'm still here." Inside, the clinic was shadowed and still. The only sound was the low hum of equipment, a clock ticking on the wall. Dr. Caldwell met him in the hall, hair pulled back, eyes sharp and tired beneath wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, just ushered Mason and Atlas into the exam room, already gloving up. "He's lost a lot of blood," she muttered, peeling back the duty jacket to expose the wound. "That wire's been there a while." She found scissors and worked quickly, murmuring to Atlas, "Easy, boy. You're safe now. That's it." Atlas tried to rise but flopped sideways. Every movement sent a tremor through his frame, but he made no attempt to bite or snap. He just watched Mason, something wild and desperate behind the pain. Mason's throat tightened. The vet worked in silence, clipping fur, cleaning the wound. She paused, frowning. "There's a serial tattoo here, military style." She glanced up at Mason, voice lower. "You see this?" Under the ragged fur, just above Atlas's shoulder, was a string of numbers inked into the skin. Old, faded, almost lost in a web of scars. Caldwell ran her fingers along the line. "And look, this bump under the skin. Someone tried to dig a microchip out. Crude job. They didn't want him tracked." Mason stared. So he's, what, a service dog? Police or military? Dr. Caldwell's mouth tightened. Could be either. Or private contractor. There's been rumors about dogs getting stolen, repurposed, trafficked out of state. People pay big money for trained animals. She reached for a sedative, her movements gentle but firm. He's running on empty. I need to get him under and stitched up. You staying? Mason nodded, backing into the corner, hands shaking. He could handle shootouts, car chases, the usual chaos. But this felt different. Raw. Immediate. He watched as the vet slid the needle in, murmuring, "Good boy. Just sleep. That's right." Atlas's eyes drifted to Mason's one last time. Then, just before sleep took him, his tongue flicked out, brushing Mason's fingers. For a moment, the room was utterly still. The only sound was the steady beep of a monitor as Atlas's breathing evened out. Dr. Caldwell moved quickly, stitching, cleaning, working with the focus of someone who'd saved 1,000 broken creatures and still cared about every one. Mason sat on the floor, head back against the cool wall, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. The dog, the blood-stained flyer, the rain outside that never seemed to let up. He thought about the serial number, the crude attempt at erasure. Somebody wanted Atlas off the grid. Somebody wanted him to disappear. And when that failed, they dumped him like garbage in the middle of the storm. Mason felt his jaw clench. He'd seen people do the same to other people. Discard what couldn't be controlled. Erase the inconvenient. His mind flashed back to Memphis, to mistakes he couldn't forget, to lives he hadn't saved. He dug his fingers into his knees to steady himself. The door swung open. Dr. Caldwell straightened, peeling off her gloves. He's stable for now. You did the right thing getting him here. She hesitated, softer now. He'll need a name for the records. Mason didn't hesitate. Atlas. Caldwell nodded, jotting it down. Atlas it is. Thunder rattled the windows. The vet checked the wound one more time, then laid a gentle hand on Mason's shoulder. Go get dry. I'll keep him under observation. He's tough. Might be the toughest I've seen in a while. Mason stood, not trusting his voice. He glanced through the glass at the sleeping dog. Atlas looked almost peaceful, paws twitching in dreams, chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. That seed of trust, planted in pain and rain, began to take root. As Mason turned to leave, he caught a reflection in the window, a flash of headlights slowing outside, then speeding up again. Just a truck? Or something more? He couldn't be sure. But as he stood in the glow of the clinic, watching over a wounded dog and listening to the storm rage on, Mason knew one thing. He was in this now, lines crossed, no turning back. Outside, the rain showed no sign of stopping. Inside, Atlas slept on, his fate now entwined with the only man who'd stopped to care. And as the night pressed on, both man and dog, each scarred, each searching for meaning, clung to the fragile hope that rescue, even in the darkest hours, might finally mean something lasting. The rain kept falling long after Mason should have gone home. But he stayed, half sitting, half slouched on a cold bench in the dim hallway of the Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic, just outside the pool of light that spilled from Atlas's recovery room. Every tick of the wall clock sounded louder at night, marking the slow crawl of hours that refused to pass. Mason's uniform clung to him, still damp, boots leaving small puddles beneath his feet. He was used to long nights, but this one felt different, like something unfinished was holding him hostage. He watched the closed door through tired eyes, rubbing at his knuckles, mind replaying memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Through the glass window, Mason could see Dr. Caldwell moving around Atlas. She was gentle, her words soft and low, stroking the big German shepherd's neck as she checked his monitors. Atlas's body looked almost too big for the steel table, fur shorn away in patches, revealing a road map of scars and bruises beneath. He looked fragile in a way Mason hadn't expected, vulnerable but unbroken. Mason shifted, remembering another night. Years ago, Memphis. Different city, different rain. He'd been undercover then, running on caffeine and nerves, convinced he could save everyone if he just tried hard enough. He'd believed in the work. Until it all went sideways, gunshots, screams, a girl lost in the chaos, someone he'd promised to protect. After that, the guilt settled in his bones, refusing to leave. He'd learned how to function with it, how to hide the worst of it, but he'd never figured out how to let it go. A muffled whimper pulled him back. He watched Atlas flinch as Dr. Caldwell injected antibiotics, the dog's lips curling back just enough to show teeth, but not to bite. The reaction wasn't fear. It was memory, Mason realized. Something learned from pain, not from hate. He pressed his forehead to the glass, letting the cool surface ground him. "Can you ever really leave broken things behind?" he whispered, words lost in the hum of machines and rain. The question wasn't for Atlas. It was for himself. Caldwell finished her work, her silhouette blurring as Mason's eyes clouded. He could see the care in her hands, the way she moved slowly, never rushing the dog. When she stepped into the hallway, she let the door swing quietly behind her. "He's holding on," she said. "Tough one, your Atlas." "He's not mine," Mason muttered automatically, but even he didn't believe it. Caldwell just gave him a look, one that said she understood the lies we tell ourselves to keep breathing. She offered him a cup of bitter coffee, then slid down the wall to sit beside him. "You okay?" she asked, voice low, as if afraid the dog could hear. He shrugged. "Been better." Silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the steady beeping from inside. "You see dogs like this a lot?" he finally managed. Caldwell's face hardened. "Not this bad, no. Whoever had him trained him rough. Look at those scars, old breaks. You don't get those just running through a field. Somebody wanted him obedient, not just skilled." Mason stared at his hands. He could feel the weight of that statement pressing down. "You think he can recover?" She looked at him carefully. "Physically, maybe. The rest?" She shook her head. "That's up to him. And you, maybe." Mason tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. He remembered the girl in Memphis, the promise broken. "Some things you don't get over," he said quietly. Caldwell just listened. That was the thing Mason appreciated about her. She didn't push, didn't try to fix what she couldn't touch. She left space for silence, as if she knew that sometimes all you could do was survive the night. Atlas shifted on the table, tail twitching. The monitor beeped faster, his paws paddling the air, caught in some memory Mason could only imagine. He wondered what the dog saw when he closed his eyes. Training fields or cages, commands barked out in a language meant for war, not for life. Mason stood and stepped closer to the window. He could see more now. Faint lines beneath the fur, old scars that spoke of years of use and abuse. There were patches where the hair would never grow back, and a jagged line where the microchip had been hacked out, leaving a puckered wound. "He's seen things," Mason whispered, as much to himself as to the empty room. "Maybe too much." Caldwell joined him at the glass, arms folded. He fought to stay alive. "That matters." She paused. watching Atlas's chest rise and fall. You both did. For a moment, neither said anything. Mason watched the dog, remembering every time he'd tried to save someone and failed. He wondered if Atlas felt the same, if dogs carried their ghosts the way people did. He thought about leaving, going home, pretending tonight was just another storm. But his feet wouldn't move. There was a gravity to the room, something binding him to this battered animal. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. As dawn began to creep through the blinds, gray and uncertain, Mason realized he wasn't alone in his sleeplessness. He saw in Atlas the same stubborn refusal to give up, the same need for something, someone, to prove that broken things could be made whole, or at least less alone. He pressed a hand to the glass, a silent promise forming somewhere beneath his scars. "I'll stay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was a vow to Atlas or himself. Outside, the rain eased, but inside, the long night continued. 2 survivors, each nursing wounds deeper than anyone could see, each daring to hope for just one more chance at healing. The rain had finally let up by morning, but clouds still hung heavy over Oak Ridge, the world outside the clinic sodden and silent. Mason's head throbbed from lack of sleep, a dull ache behind his eyes as he watched Dr. Caldwell check Atlas one last time. The German shepherd was awake now, groggy, stitched, leg bandaged thickly, eyes dull but aware. He flinched at the metallic rattle of the door, but when Mason knelt in front of him, Atlas met his gaze. Breath shuddering out slow and thin, Dr. Caldwell scribbled on a chart, then fixed Mason with a look. "I'd keep him here if I could, but we're short-staffed, and I don't trust the shelter tonight. Too many break-ins lately." She lowered her voice. "You got a place for him? Just for a night or two?" Mason hesitated. He glanced at Atlas, this battered, hulking shadow of a dog, and thought about the small laundry room in his house, the faded blue blanket in the corner, the quiet that seemed even deeper since Memphis. He'd never brought a stray home before. He'd never wanted to. But the idea of leaving Atlas alone somewhere, after everything, made his stomach twist. "I'll take him," Mason said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "He'll be safe with me." Caldwell nodded, relief flickering across her tired features. "He's got antibiotics, pain meds. Keep the wound clean. And—" She trailed off, then reached for Mason's hand, squeezing it. "He trusts you. Don't waste that." An hour later, Mason and Atlas pulled into the driveway, dew still clinging to the grass. Mason opened the passenger door and waited. Atlas didn't jump out. He just stood, braced and watchful, until Mason called him softly. The big shepherd limped after him, ears flat, nose working the air as if cataloging every scent. Inside, the house felt both smaller and somehow safer. Mason led Atlas straight to the laundry room, where he'd tossed a blanket on the floor beside the dryer. He filled a bowl with water, another with kibble, and waited. Atlas sniffed everything, each surface, every shadow, then lay down with a tired groan, curling his paws beneath his chin. Rain tapped softly at the windows, thunder grumbling in the distance. Mason sat on the floor, knees up, watching the dog. Atlas watched back, wary but calmer, tail giving the slightest twitch. A silent thank you, or maybe just resignation. Mason wondered what the world looked like through those eyes. Did Atlas expect this kindness to vanish? Or was he already preparing to move on again? Lightning flashed outside. Mason shivered, the storm's echoes rattling in his chest. He wanted to sleep, to close his eyes and forget the world. But every time he looked at Atlas, at the slow, careful way the dog breathed, the way he never let his guard down. He felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier and heavier. Night fell quickly, the house filling with shadow and the sweet metallic scent of rain-soaked earth. Mason tried to doze on the couch, but every creak, every gust of wind brought him back to full alertness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. Unable to rest, Mason got up and padded back to the laundry room. Atlas lifted his head, eyes glassy but tracking every move. Mason sat beside him, reaching out. Atlas tensed at first, but when Mason stroked behind his ear, the dog relaxed, a small sigh rumbling through his chest. "Yeah, I know," Mason murmured, his own hands trembling. "It's hard. Trusting people, waiting for the other shoe to drop." He didn't know if he was talking to the dog or to himself. Time passed, measured in the soft breaths of a dog who'd nearly died, and the restless shifting of a man who'd nearly lost himself more than once. At midnight, thunder shook the house. Atlas startled, scrambling to his feet, hackles raised. Mason stayed with him, silent and steady, letting the dog decide if comfort was something he could accept. Eventually, Atlas curled up against Mason's side, tension fading just a little. The world outside might still be dangerous, but here in this small, quiet room, something like hope flickered. For the first time since Memphis, Mason felt it, a tiny shift, the sense that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. Later, when Atlas finally drifted into sleep, Mason pulled out his laptop, unable to quiet his mind. He typed in the serial number Caldwell had found and scanned the news for anything about stolen K9s. What he found was both chilling and familiar. Clippings about a dog theft ring moving through Tennessee, rumors of inside jobs, dogs vanishing from kennels and police lots. One article even mentioned a German shepherd matching Atlas's description, with a note about a missing microchip and a reward that had quietly expired. Mason leaned back, heart racing. Was it possible someone in Oak Ridge was part of this? Was Atlas left at that bus stop as a warning or a mistake? He thought about the flyer, the blood, the way that truck had slowed in the rain. Nothing about this felt random. The network might be closer than anyone realized. Still, as he watched Atlas sleeping, a little more relaxed now, breath steady, ears no longer twitching at every sound, Mason allowed himself a rare moment of hope. He filled a bowl with food and set it beside Atlas's nose. The dog sniffed, hesitated, then ate. Slowly, methodically, every bite a fragile leap of faith. Mason watched, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Trust was a process, and maybe tonight they both took a step forward. The storm outside raged on, but inside, man and dog shared a fragile, growing bond. Neither knew what the morning would bring, but for the first time in a long while, Mason didn't dread the dawn. In the quiet space between thunderclaps, he found something worth staying awake for. Mornings along the river in Oak Ridge were usually wrapped in fog, softening everything, trees, houses, even pain, into quiet silhouettes. Mason woke after only a few hours of broken sleep, heavy with responsibility, but driven by something else now. 2. A need to understand the dog that slept at his feet, and maybe himself as well. Atlas stirred when Mason sat up, ears flicking, eyes sharp but calmer than the night before. Mason poured fresh water, checked the bandage, and, after a moment's hesitation, clipped on the leash Dr. Caldwell had given him. "We'll go slow," Mason promised, more to himself than the dog. "Just fresh air, nothing crazy." Outside, the grass was still slick with last night's rain. Mist curled over the ground as they made their way down the lane toward the river. Atlas limped at first, uncertain, every snap of a twig or distant sound putting his guard up. But as they reached the riverbank, the dog paused, nose twitching at scents carried on the water, decay and earth, wildflowers, distant diesel. Mason found a flat rock and sat, letting Atlas explore the grass nearby. He watched the way the dog moved, head low, always scanning for threat, pausing when birds startled in the brush or a car passed on the far road. The world was still dangerous to Atlas, and Mason understood. He too was always waiting for the next blow. Minutes passed. A barge groaned upriver, sending ripples along the bank. Mason noticed Atlas's ears perk up at the sound of distant police sirens, first alert, then confused, and then, heartbreakingly, hopeful. The dog's muscles tensed, tail stiff, eyes searching for something that never came. Mason felt the ache of that moment deep in his own chest. He reached into his jacket, fingers brushing the smooth edge of a worn coin, a souvenir from Memphis, always carried, never spent. He rubbed it between his thumb and finger. "You ever lose something you can't get back?" he asked softly, voice nearly swallowed by the river's hush. Atlas wandered closer, startled by a sudden crack of thunder from the west. He cowered, pressing against Mason's legs, whole body shivering. Mason sat perfectly still, resisting the urge to force comfort. Instead, he just waited, letting Atlas find his own calm. The storm faded, the tremors slowly easing, until the dog let out a ragged breath and sat beside Mason, eyes closed. For a long time, neither moved. Mason found himself talking, words spilling out before he could stop them. "Memphis was a long time ago. I was undercover, tried to play hero. Someone got hurt, more than one. Sometimes I think the rain'll wash it all away if I stand out here long enough, but it never does." The confession was quiet, meant for the air, not for any answer. Atlas leaned into him, a silent companion. The weight of the dog's trust, fragile, tentative, felt heavier than Mason expected. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the sound of river and dog and one push away the ghosts. He noticed, as the morning wore on, that Atlas flinched at certain things: men in hats, the sound of heavy boots on gravel, doors slamming nearby. Sometimes he'd freeze, eyes gone distant, as if remembering something best left buried. Mason watched, learning the signals, knowing how close he could get, when to speak, when to simply be present. One afternoon, as a cruiser passed along the road, its siren low and brief, Atlas rose, ears pricked, body tense. The dog stared after the sound long after it faded, chest heaving with the memory of orders, of running toward danger, not away from it. Mason felt a chill. This dog wasn't just a victim. Once he'd been something more, a guardian, a protector, betrayed by those he'd served. Over the days, the smallest victories felt like miracles. Atlas sniffed Mason's outstretched hand, then licked it, tentatively, almost apologetically. Another day, when the sky threatened rain, Mason found the dog waiting by the door, leash in his mouth, tail wagging just once, as if daring to hope this new routine would last. But there were setbacks, too. Loud voices from the neighbor's yard sent Atlas into a panic, knocking over a lamp in his scramble to hide beneath the table. Mason crouched nearby, offering no words, only a steady presence until the dog's breathing slowed. At night, Mason sometimes sat on the porch, Atlas curled beside him, both of them staring into the darkness. On one such evening, the memories came sharper: gunfire, lost faces, the gut-deep certainty he'd failed when it mattered most. He found himself talking again, words raw and halting. People think cops are made of armor. Truth is, most of us are patched together from what's left after the worst is done. He looked down at Atlas, who met his eyes, unblinking, listening. I guess I needed to say that out loud. Atlas rested his head on Mason's knee, eyes soft with a kind of understanding no human could fake. The dog's scars glimmered in the porch light, reminders of pain endured and survived. As days passed, Mason and Atlas fell into a rhythm, a fragile dance of learning and trust. Healing, they discovered, wasn't a straight line, but in the quiet, by the water, or in the hush of the house at night, each learned to lean on the other. Atlas grew a little braver. Mason found moments of peace. Both bore scars, some visible, some not. Yet as dawn broke one quiet morning, Mason realized he wasn't alone in his fight anymore. And maybe, just maybe, neither was Atlas. Mason thought he knew what it meant to live with tension. A cop's life was always tuned to some low, steady thrum of danger, but the kind that crept into his house now was different. It was personal, sharp as a razor's edge, and close enough to steal his sleep. It started on a night when the air was thick, windows beaded with leftover rain. Mason was washing dishes, radio mumbling soft jazz, Atlas asleep at his feet. The dog had been making slow progress, confidence blooming in small ways. A wag of the tail at the mailman, his head nudging Mason's hand when he paused on the porch. The comfort was so fragile that Mason caught himself holding his breath, afraid it would vanish. He was halfway to believing they'd finally found some peace when a sound shattered it. A single metallic thud at the front door, sharp, then silence. Atlas jerked awake, hackles up, low growl echoing in his chest. Mason's pulse spiked as he dried his hands and grabbed his service weapon. The porch light flickered as he approached. What he found froze him in place, a kitchen knife, stabbed deep into the wood of his door, blade glinting. Attached, with a rubber band, was a scrap of torn notepad paper. Return what's ours. For a long, brittle moment, Mason just stood there, the air electric with old fear. The house behind him was silent except for Atlas's nails tapping the floor. The big shepherd appearing at his side, body rigid, eyes locked on the doorway. Atlas's presence was a shield, a living wall between Mason and whatever threat waited outside. In that moment, Mason realized the bond between them had shifted. This dog, wounded and mistrustful only days before, was now ready to face danger for him. Mason swept the yard with a flashlight, every shadow growing teeth in his imagination. Nothing but the whir of insects and the wind. But he knew better than to feel safe. Someone had been here, someone who wanted Atlas, and maybe Mason too, gone. He brought the knife and note inside, locking every bolt and checking every window twice. He tried to steady his breathing, but the house felt suddenly unfamiliar, every squeak and groan a possible warning. Atlas shadowed him from room to room, silent, refusing to relax. When Mason finally got the shakes under control, he sat at his desk and pulled up the footage from his cheap front porch camera. It took only minutes to find what he was looking for. In the blue-tinted night vision, a masked man in a rain jacket moved up the walkway. He never looked at the camera, never hesitated, just stabbed the knife in, pressed the note, and disappeared into the darkness. The car he came in never showed its plates. Mason felt the old anger rise, the kind that comes when your own home is no longer your sanctuary. He texted Dr. Caldwell, "Got a problem. Threat at my door. Atlas and I are okay, but I need backup on the dog's medical history. Anything weird lately at your clinic?" She replied almost instantly, "You're not the first. Another vet got threatened 2 weeks ago. Be careful. Let me know if you need a safe place to crash." He called Detective Serena Blake, a friend from the force with a knack for digging up what others missed. When Mason explained the situation, her voice sharpened. "You think it's connected to the K9 ring?" she asked. "I know it is," Mason said. "They want Atlas back, or they want him gone." Serena promised to stop by the next day, but Mason heard in her voice what he'd been trying not to admit. This was bigger than a stolen dog. Someone local was helping the traffickers, someone who knew where Mason lived and what hours he kept. The night pressed in close. Atlas paced the halls, tail held low, always glancing at Mason as if to check that the rules of this new world still held. Mason tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every creak making him reach for his weapon, every shadow in the yard turning into a threat. He spent the next morning canvassing his neighbors, showing the grainy video, asking if anyone saw something strange. Most just shook their heads, but old Mrs. Calloway, who lived 2 houses down, pursed her lips and pointed to her security camera. "Take a look. Somebody's been watching your place for days. Saw them parked out front last week. Never got a plate, but it was a dark SUV, not local." Back inside, Mason watched the footage. The same masked figure, several times over the past week, always circling, sometimes stopping to peer in windows. Each time Atlas had barked, but Mason had thought it was just the raccoons again. He felt sick. How long had he missed the warning signs? With Serena's help, Mason started a paper trail, official report, photos, video files, the threatening note. He kept Dr. Caldwell in the loop, updating her on every odd call, every strange car parked on the street. They formed a tiny circle of trust, each person wary but loyal. That evening, as Mason bolted the last lock, Atlas settled beside him, pressing close in the quiet. Mason reached down, his hand trembling, and rested it on the big shepherd's neck. "They won't take you," he said, voice rough. "Not again." Atlas looked up, brown eyes burning with something between fear and fierce loyalty. For once, Mason didn't feel alone in his fight. There were still unanswered questions. Who was helping the traffickers? How did they know Atlas was alive? But now Mason had a reason to keep pushing. Not just for justice, but for the battered soul sleeping at his feet. The house was still. Outside, thunder grumbled far off. Inside, Mason and Atlas waited, their bond forged in fear, ready for whatever darkness would come next. The morning after the threat, Oak Ridge felt different. The rain had finally stopped, but clouds clung low, muting everything into dull shades of gray. Mason couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Every step on the front porch, every passing car, even the neighbor's cat slinking across the yard seemed laced with meaning. Serena Blake arrived with coffee and a thin folder of crime scene photos tucked under her arm. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent her life on the job, but her eyes softened as Atlas greeted her at the door, tail wagging hesitantly. "He's a handsome one," Serena said, crouching to let Atlas sniff her hand. "I'd say he's lucky to have you, but might be the other way around." Mason managed a half smile. "Some days, I can't tell." They spread out maps and police files across his dining table, pushing aside old mail and half-eaten takeout. Serena circled addresses, highlighting incidents that all seemed to orbit a cluster of warehouses on the south edge of town, the kind of places most people didn't notice but cops knew by heart. "We've had complaints," she said. "Late-night deliveries, dogs barking, folks going in and out at all hours. Too many coincidences." Mason's hand hovered over the grainy security footage. He traced the masked figure's path with his finger. "They're running the operation out of there. Dogs in, dogs out. Nobody asks questions." Atlas, lying beneath the table, tensed when Mason said, "Dogs in." His ears flicked back, nose wrinkling, a low whine almost lost in the clatter of papers. Mason reached down, fingers brushing Atlas's scarred neck. "We'll be careful," he whispered. Serena glanced at Mason, eyebrow raised. "You talking to me or him?" "Both." They devised a plan. Simple but risky. Serena would arrange for backup, but Mason and Atlas would do the first sweep. "You know those warehouses better than anyone," Serena said. "But Mason, don't be a hero. If something feels off, get out." "Copy that," Mason replied. But they both knew he wasn't good at walking away. That night, under the cover of darkness, Mason parked 2 blocks from the warehouses. Atlas, sensing the tension, paced in the back seat, chest rising and falling in silent warning. Mason pulled on a cap, checked his weapon, and whispered, "Stay close, but don't make a sound." Atlas pressed his nose to Mason's palm, steadying both of them. The warehouses loomed, hulking silhouettes against the weak moonlight. Mason skirted the chain-link fence, heart pounding in his throat. In the distance, a generator hummed. He heard voices, sharp, hurried, slipping in and out of English and something else. Mason recognized one: Vance, a respected local businessman, known for his charity work and Sunday church attendance. Mason's jaw clenched. It was always the ones who hid in plain sight. Atlas stopped suddenly, hackles up. He stared at a side door, trembling. Mason knew that look. Recognition and dread. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Mason murmured, watching the dog's body tense. "They hurt you here." He swallowed the anger rising inside, promising himself he'd make this right. The back lot was filled with shadows, crates, old barrels, and, heartbreakingly, a row of cages. Mason could see shapes moving inside, soft whines barely audible. Atlas pulled forward, straining at the leash. He recognized the sounds. Mason crept closer, using the crates for cover. His heart dropped as he saw the ledger left carelessly on a barrel, names, numbers, prices, and photos. He rifled through the pages, hands shaking when he found Atlas's photo, taken months ago. "Sold" scrawled across it in red ink. A deep, sick rage settled in his gut. He snapped photos of every page, every scrap of evidence. Then footsteps echoed. Mason ducked behind a stack of boxes, pulling Atlas close. 2 men walked by, arguing in hushed tones. One wore a mask, the other a ball cap pulled low. They paused, scanning the cages, and for a terrifying moment, Mason thought they'd seen him. But a truck's headlights swept the lot, and they moved on. Mason slipped back toward the exit, mind spinning with what he'd learned. He was nearly free when a door creaked open, and a familiar voice called out. "Gallagher? That you?" Mason froze. It was Vance, eyes sharp in the darkness, smile brittle. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Thinking fast, Mason replied, "Got a tip about stray dogs. Thought I heard something." Vance's gaze flicked to Atlas. "That's a fine animal you've got. Looks like one of mine." His voice was smooth, friendly. Too friendly. Mason's grip tightened on Atlas's leash. "Not yours. He's with me now." Vance's smile widened, but his eyes were cold. "Some things never really belong to anyone, Gallagher. They just end up with whoever's strong enough to keep them." Mason felt Atlas press against his leg, the dog's body humming with tension. Mason forced himself to nod and retreat, the threat hanging in the air like the promise of another storm. Back at the car, Atlas jumped in, trembling but alert. Mason locked the doors, heart hammering, and sent Serena everything: photos, locations, Vance's words. "We need a warrant, and we need it tonight." Serena's reply was immediate, already moving. Stay put. You did good. Mason glanced at Atlas, the two of them framed in the dashboard's blue glow. Atlas met his gaze, fearful, but with a flicker of strength. "We're in this together," Mason said, running a hand over the dog's head. "I won't let them take you again." The night pressed in, heavy with threat and promise. Mason and Atlas, wounded but not broken, braced for the fight to come. Knowing the next step might be the most dangerous of all, Oak Ridge after midnight was a ghost town, streets emptied by fear and rain. Mason could feel the weight of the coming storm, the kind that didn't show up on the weather report, a pressure building in his chest, winding tighter with every passing minute. His phone buzzed with a text. "Come alone, abandoned train station, midnight, or the dog dies." No name, no number, just those 7 words, cutting through any hope of a peaceful ending. Mason paced the kitchen, every instinct screaming to call for backup. But he couldn't shake the image of Atlas in a cage again, trembling in a place where the world only brought pain. He glanced down, Atlas by his side, tense, head low, sensing the unease. Mason crouched, running a hand along the dog's battered neck. "I need you, buddy. But I won't let them hurt you again." He strapped his service weapon on, heart thumping, and typed out a single message to Serena. "Going to the train station, sending my GPS. If you don't hear from me in an hour, come." He hesitated, then recorded a voice memo on his phone, a message to his late brother, whose memory never left him. "If this goes sideways, I tried, Danny. I did what I could. Look out for me if you can." Atlas waited at the door, ready despite the fear in his eyes. Mason let the dog climb into the cruiser's back seat, then drove through empty streets, rain streaking the windshield in silver veins. The station loomed at the edge of town, hulking and dark. Broken windows glinting in the headlights. Mason parked in the shadows, heart in his throat. He stepped out into the cold, Atlas at his side, leash clipped but loose. The silence was total, broken only by distant thunder and the soft patter of rain on corrugated metal. Mason moved slowly, flashlight off, boots crunching on gravel. Every sense was alive, every shadow a potential threat. Suddenly, headlights snapped on, blinding him. 4 figures stepped from the darkness, faces hidden by masks, one holding a tranquilizer rifle, another gripped a lead rope, and Mason's gut twisted as he realized they wanted Atlas alive, not dead. "Put your weapon down, Gallagher," one called, voice muffled. "Slide it over, now." Mason gritted his teeth, hands raised. "I'm not here for trouble. Let the dog go. He's not worth your blood." The leader stepped forward, gun raised. "He's worth more than you know. Someone wants him back, and they don't care what happens to you." Atlas pressed against Mason, sensing the tension, but didn't cower. His whole body shook, but his eyes stayed on Mason, trusting, waiting. Mason slid his gun onto the wet concrete, never looking away from the men. "Let him go," Mason repeated, voice low. "You already got what you wanted." The man with the tranquilizer moved, quick as a viper, firing a dart into Atlas's flank. The dog yelped, muscles spasming, but didn't run. He stood his ground, teeth bared in one final act of defiance. "No!" Mason lunged, fists clenched, but 2 men pinned him, driving him to his knees. Atlas staggered, head lolling, but as the gang leader reached for him, the dog snapped, biting hard, jaws locking onto the man's forearm. Blood sprayed, the man howling in pain. Mason broke free, tackling one attacker, adrenaline roaring in his ears. But it was too many. Boots slammed into his ribs, hands wrenching his arms behind his back. Atlas fought sedation, eyes wild, refusing to let go until another dart hit his shoulder. He slumped to the ground, breath labored, tongue lolling, but not before Mason heard the distant wail of sirens. A single gunshot split the air, but the bullet hit gravel. The gang's confidence crumbled. Serena's voice crackled through Mason's earpiece. "We're coming in!" And the flash of blue lights cut through the night. Chaos erupted, figures scattering, backup flooding the lot. Dogs barking in terror from the shadows. Mason crawled to Atlas, pulling the limp dog into his arms. "Stay with me. Atlas, don't you dare leave me now!" Atlas's eyes fluttered, then stilled, breath shallow but alive. Serena and her team stormed the platform, subduing the gang, arresting Vance as he tried to slip away in the confusion. Blood from Atlas's bite soaked the man's sleeve. Mason watched, dazed, as the officers rounded up every criminal, every accomplice. The K9 cages were cut open, terrified dogs spilling into waiting arms. Mason barely heard the chaos. He cradled Atlas, rocking gently. "It's over. Buddy, you did it. You did so good." His voice broke, tears streaking his face, mixing with the rain. Serena knelt beside him, checking Atlas's pulse. "He's alive. We got him. We got them all, Mason." He nodded, body racked by exhaustion and relief. "Don't let them take him. Not ever again." "We won't," Serena promised, voice steady. "He's safe now. Both of you are." The night finally broke as first light edged the horizon. Mason carried Atlas to the waiting ambulance, refusing to let go. The worst was over, but healing, real healing, was only just beginning. In the hush before dawn, with rain washing away the blood and fear, Oak Ridge changed. Mason knew the scars would linger, on himself, on Atlas, on the town. But for the first time, hope felt possible. Even in the darkest hour, they'd found their way through, and neither man nor dog would ever be alone again. In the weeks that followed the raid, Oak Ridge moved differently. Word of what happened at the train station ran through the town like a current. Stories whispered in church pews, replayed over mugs of coffee, shared in quiet conversations at the clinic. Mason found himself recognized in places he'd once passed through invisible, a strange warmth in every nod and handshake. But none of that mattered to him as much as the steady rhythm of his new days. Every morning, he drove across town to Dr. Caldwell's clinic, where Atlas was recovering. The wounds from the tranquilizer darts healed quickly, but the other scars, old and new, took longer. Sunlight streaked the walls of the recovery room, tracing patterns across Atlas's back as he slept. Sometimes Mason would just sit and watch him breathe, the steady rise and fall of his chest grounding him in a way nothing else could. Mason never missed a visiting hour. The staff learned to expect him, sometimes with a bag of treats, sometimes just with a battered paperback he read aloud in a low, even voice. The old detective novel became a ritual. Mason's words, halting at first, smoothed out as he read chapter after chapter. Sometimes Atlas's tail would twitch in his sleep, a subtle response that made Mason smile. The town began to change too. People dropped by the clinic with homemade blankets and bags of dog food. Kids left hand-drawn pictures, dogs with capes, police officers with heroic smiles, hearts everywhere. Someone put a sign in the clinic's window, "Thank you, Atlas." Mason was quietly overwhelmed by the kindness. For so long he'd felt isolated, haunted by the Memphis case and its ghosts. Now, with Atlas beside him, he found himself accepting help, even, occasionally, asking for it. Atlas, in his own way, started to heal too. At first, he'd growl or shy away when a stranger reached out, but slowly he began to greet staff with a soft nudge. He even learned to tolerate the children who visited to meet the hero dog. Mason watched the transformation with awe, the way Atlas would lie down beside a trembling puppy, letting the smaller animal curl into his side, breathing slow and steady until the shaking stopped. It was therapy, but not the kind with words. One morning, Mason found himself sitting on the floor by Atlas's kennel, shoulders slumped. The clinic was quiet, sunlight spilling in gold through the blinds. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and peanut butter. He took a breath, feeling the ache in his chest loosen just enough. "I keep thinking about Memphis," he confessed quietly. "How I failed. How I let everyone down." His voice cracked. "But you kept fighting. Even when they tried to erase you. Even when it hurt." Atlas watched him, deep eyes unwavering, while Mason reached through the bars, and Atlas pressed his nose into Mason's palm. Gentle, forgiving, a silent absolution. For the first time in years, Mason let himself cry. No hiding, no shame. The tears were soft, cleansing, falling for both the man and the dog. The weeks went on. Mason started helping out at the clinic, feeding animals, cleaning kennels, learning the small rituals of care. He discovered comfort in repetition, in the way each small act built trust, not just with Atlas, but with himself and with the world. The work was grounding, a kind of prayer he never knew he needed. Dr. Caldwell noticed the change. "You're good with them," she said one afternoon as Mason refilled water bowls. "It's not just Atlas. The others calm down when you're here." Mason shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Guess we understand each other." She nodded, pausing. "Physical healing's just part of it. For dogs and people. The rest is consistency. Kindness. Showing up even when it's hard." Her words stayed with him. He thought about all the days he'd spent running from pain, how much energy he'd wasted trying to outpace his own guilt. With Atlas, he couldn't run. The dog needed him there, patient and present, no matter how uncomfortable the feeling. The town's transformation was real. Once, people whispered about damaged animals or troubled souls. Now they showed up at fundraisers and asked how they could help. An anonymous donor covered the costs for Atlas's care. A group of high schoolers raised money with a car wash and donated every penny to the clinic. Mason saw people change their minds about what broken looked like. He saw how Atlas's story brought them together. There were setbacks, of course. Days when Atlas relapsed, startled by a sudden noise or the wrong scent. Days when Mason woke from nightmares, sweat cold on his skin, memories pressing in. But in the light of day, healing felt possible. One afternoon, Mason and Atlas sat outside the clinic, sun warm on their faces. Atlas had just comforted a terrified rescue puppy, letting the little dog nap curled against his belly. Mason watched, heart full. "You did good, buddy," he murmured, ruffling the thick fur. "You did real good." Later, Dr. Caldwell found Mason fixing a broken latch on one of the kennels. "The town's coming together," she said. "We're raising enough for that sanctuary we talked about, and people want you to help run it." Mason looked at her, surprised. "Me?" She smiled, gentle and knowing. "You saved him, Mason, and you're helping save the others. Maybe you're the one who needed saving too." He considered that as he watched Atlas amble over, tail wagging slow and easy. Maybe redemption didn't mean forgetting the past. Maybe it meant showing up every day and choosing to be better, one act of care at a time. As the sun set behind the clinic, the windows glowed gold, casting Atlas's shadow long across the yard. Mason felt the old pain recede, replaced by something steadier, something like peace. Atlas had given him a second chance, and Mason meant to use it well. Oak Ridge was healing, so was he. And as long as they kept showing up for each other, dog and man, wounded and mending, they could build something new. Together. Spring in Oak Ridge brought a gentler kind of rain, the sort that made things grow instead of hiding old pain. The clouds, once heavy and threatening, now drifted high and slow, drifting over a town that felt different, lighter somehow. It was on one such bright, breezy morning that the doors of the Atlas Sanctuary opened for the first time. The air was electric with anticipation. Mason stood just outside the new fence, his dress shirt a little wrinkled, hands trembling as he ran his palm along Atlas's strong back. Paper hearts, drawn by local children, fluttered from every post, each one carrying a name, a hope, a memory. Families gathered, officers in pressed uniforms mingled with kids and retirees, and at the center of it all, Atlas waited, his coat glossy, gait steady, a living testament to survival. "Ready?" Mason whispered. Atlas nudged his hand, steady as ever. The crowd parted as Mason and Atlas led the first procession through the sanctuary gates. Cameras flashed. Someone cheered. Atlas barely seemed to notice the attention. His eyes searched for something gentler. A new rescue cowering by the water bowl. A volunteer with kind hands. A child in need of comfort. Inside, the sanctuary was everything they'd dreamed. Sunlit runs, open space, quiet rooms for the wounded and afraid. Survivors, officers, and families gathered under a makeshift awning for the ceremony. Serena gave a short, fierce speech. Dr. Caldwell wept quietly in the front row. Mason, when his turn came, nearly lost his voice. He looked at Atlas, always, always Atlas, and felt the words rising. "I could stand here and talk about the raid, or the criminals we put away, but I think you all know that story by now." He hesitated, searching the faces, neighbors, skeptics, former adversaries, and friends. What you might not know is what it means to be given another chance, what it means to be broken, and to find out you're not alone in that. I spent years believing I'd failed as a cop, failed as a man, but this dog, he taught me that sometimes the lost ones are the ones who lead you home. He shared the hard truths, the nightmares, the guilt, the nights when he couldn't see past his own mistakes. He talked about trust and forgiveness and the stubborn, daily work of healing. "Redemption isn't about erasing the past," he said, voice shaking. "It's about choosing, every day, to show up, to do better. Not just for ourselves, but for each other." There was a hush. Atlas, sensing the moment, stepped forward, nudging Mason's leg, then trotting over to a fearful new arrival, a young German shepherd just rescued from another busted ring. Gently, Atlas guided the shaking dog to the water, settling beside him with an easy confidence only the broken ever earn. All day, Atlas moved among the guests, never hurried, always alert. When a little boy, his father in prison, his eyes wide with uncertainty, sat by himself under a tree, Atlas wandered over and let the child lean against his side. A ripple of calm moved through the crowd. These, Mason thought, were the real miracles, quiet moments, mostly unnoticed, where survival became hope. Later, as dusk softened the sky, Mason slipped away to his small office. He sat at the old desk and wrote a letter to his late brother. "Danny," he wrote, "for a long time I thought I'd never come back from the things I saw, from the people I couldn't save. But Atlas taught me that even the lost can lead the way home. Every scar tells a story, not just of pain, but of survival. I'm learning how to listen." The town, once suspicious of damaged animals and damaged people, changed too. Folks who used to avert their eyes now volunteered at the sanctuary, brought food, or simply stopped to offer a kind word. The high school kids who once cut through Mason's yard now organized supply drives. Even the crusty old men at the diner sent dog biscuits and fresh-baked bread. Atlas became more than a mascot. He was a mentor, a symbol, a healer in his own right. He learned to sense pain in others, waiting quietly until they were ready to reach out. Survivors, dogs, and people came to the sanctuary and found a place where scars weren't shameful, just part of the journey. Reporters wrote stories, local news cameras rolled, and soon letters poured in from all over the country. Veterans, survivors, lonely souls thanking Atlas and Mason for reminding them that hope survives, even in the worst storms. Mason was asked to speak at police conferences, animal welfare seminars. He always brought Atlas, always ended with the same invitation. What wounded soul might need your care today? What if the one you save ends up saving you too? Some days were still hard. Some nights still brought bad dreams. But the ritual of care, opening a door, sitting with a trembling animal, letting a child cry without fear, became Mason's daily prayer. The sanctuary thrived, not just as a shelter, but as proof of what a wounded community could do when it refused to give up on its own. In the end, Mason realized, salvation was never about grand gestures. It was in the quiet persistence, the ordinary acts of kindness that built something new from what was nearly lost. True courage wasn't about being unbroken. It was about being willing to try again, to trust again, to love again, even after heartbreak. As night fell and the paper hearts fluttered on the fence, Mason sat beside Atlas under the stars. He watched the town, changed, alive, hopeful, and whispered, "We did it, buddy. We're home." And for anyone listening, the message was clear. No one is beyond saving, and sometimes the greatest story is simply finding your way back to the light, together.